any outlet people have, they hate you even more, and they're even more determined to crush you. So this isn't going to get better as they get more power. It's not like they're going to somehow be sated with the power and control they have. They're just going to hate the dissenters more and more and want to crush them.
God, that's so smart and deep and true. That's why when they won in 2020, they got angrier. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Sean Davis, thanks so much. Great to see you tonight.
Thank you.
So not only are these people sinister, they're also kind of neurotic and pathetic. They're telling us about the terrors of January 6th, but in reality, we just learned how fragile and narcissistic they actually are. They can't bring themselves to denounce real and present threats of violence in our nation's cities. They're everywhere. One of the people who's chronicled them closely is Michael Tracy, who is an actual independent journalist. His work is on Substack, and we highly recommend it. But he's been following us since the first day, and we're interested in his views on it. Michael Tracy, thanks a lot for coming on. What do you make of this?
Well, on that very first day, Chuck Schumer stood up and said something pretty incredible. He said that January 6th, 2021 will go down in infamy just like Pearl Harbor went down in infamy. So he likened the magnitude of January 6th immediately to Pearl Harbor. So already this process of myth-making was underway hours after Congress reconvened and they evaded that momentary trauma of having their legislative business interrupted for a couple hours. That's what we were told was tantamount to Pearl Harbor.
I remember that very well. You were one of the very few who pointed it out. Isn't it the role, the legitimate role of the news media to add a little bit of perspective? Maybe you don't editorialize, but I don't know, 3,000 people killed on December 7th, 1941. Ashley Babbitt killed on January 6th, like Pearl Harbor. Why nobody push back against that?
Well, because most of the media probably would only push back from the standpoint of saying that Pearl Harbor isn't an extreme enough of a comparison. They might have to invent some, alien invasion or something to liken January 6th to, given how emotionally traumatized they were by the whole experience. It's interesting that Democrats continue to focus so ineluctably on this issue because who were the purported victims of January 6th? Who are the people that they're claiming really suffered the most? Well, mainly it's the politicians and journalists who were in the Capitol that day. And those happen to be two of the most despised groups in America. And yet, Democrats have now apparently calculated that keeping this front and center is going to benefit them in the midterms. And, there is a certain political logic to that, perhaps, however warped. Because if you notice, a lot of progressives and people maybe who are aligned with Bernie Sanders or kind of had to be cajoled into supporting Joe Biden in 2020, they're becoming a little bit disillusioned because the Democrats really aren't delivering much of anything legislatively.
Yes.
And so Adam Schiff and company want to keep this show going until fall because that'll enable them to pressure potentially weary Democratic base voters by saying, look, whatever gripes you might have about how we've governed, you must support Democrats. You must vote to re-empower Democrats because if you don't, that will empower the existentially threatening Republicans. And so therefore, it's your solemn duty to vote, as always, for Democrats because the country will collapse. We will all face this world cataclysmic destruction if the Democrats are not in power. That's basically what it boils down to. And before I forget, because this is something that was very interesting, and I recalled it as you were talking about the civil liberties component of January 6th. Last summer, I covered the plea hearing of one of the defendants of January 6th. The first defendant, his name is Paul Hodgkins, who pleaded guilty to a felony charge. The first defendant who was sentenced related to January 6th. And when the Department of Justice was arguing for an even harsher sentence for this individual who had committed no violent crime, the government readily conceded that this individual did not do anything that entailed physical violence. But nevertheless, the DOJ wanted him in prison for a harsher sentence because they claimed he was responsible for inflicting emotional injury. On whom? On the politicians who were assembled in the Capitol that day. So the federal law enforcement apparatus had to invent this new paradigm of what supposedly constitutes an injury in order to keep nonviolent offenders in federal prison for longer. Now, I don't remember anybody really ever talking about that. I happened to notice it because I looked at the documents. But there are so many other civil liberties implications to this story that are just totally ignored. So I'm glad at least someone is beginning to talk about them.
It's unbelievable. Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham, shoot more Trump voters. Michael Tracy, I appreciate your reporting always. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we should tell you, and as we said at the top, this is the only hour on American television that is not broadcasting unfiltered propaganda into the homes of unsuspecting viewers. On the screen, you see 8 boxes. Those are 8 different TV channels taking the Nancy Pelosi feed unfiltered. Now, if at any time in your life you've ever made fun of totalitarian regimes that, broadcast lies into the homes of the population that they can't turn off, take a look at that. That's happening right now. Meanwhile, gas is over $5. Inflation is higher than it's been in the lifetime of most Americans. Violent crime is making cities impossible to live in, and more than 100,000 Americans OD'd on drugs last year. Why isn't there a primetime hearing about any of that? Charlie Hurt is the opinion editor of the Washington Times. He joins us tonight. Charlie, great to see you. I mean, if you take 3 steps back, what we're really watching is members of Congress talking about themselves again.
Yeah, absolutely, because the alternative is for them to have to talk about policies. And if they talk about policies, they have to talk about and it's not just their failures of, all the failures we see right in front of us, gas prices, crime, an open border, fentanyl deaths. You can go through, the list is endless. And if anybody got out of Washington, any of these people got out of Washington and talked to normal people, they would realize that American people are very, very concerned about a lot of things. This is not one of them. But then you step back even farther and you look at just the cavalcade of lies that Democrat politicians have made in their promises to get elected ever since even before Joe Biden came to Washington. Whether it's solving health care problems for poor people, ending poverty, or providing public education to people, they failed on all of these fronts. And the reason and I call this the third failed impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump. The reason they have to talk about this stuff is because they can't talk about those other issues. They have to distract everybody from it. But then it's even crazier than that, because when you get to the issue of security and you start thinking about what people, whose businesses were destroyed in these riots that Democrats supported in the year running up to the election, and you think about the security, think about the parents whose children, they fear for their children going into an elementary school today. And Democrats control both chambers of Congress and the White House. They have not done a damn thing to protect children in schools.
Yeah.
Beyond that, the third branch of government, the judiciary, we have Supreme Court justices living under the threat of their family being assassinated, and Nancy Pelosi will do nothing about it. All she can talk about is this day a year and a half ago when she was afraid, or they were afraid of some goofball trespassing nutty rioters coming through the Capitol. I think that what we're seeing, and I think all this is going to backfire. And I think what we're seeing right here, and I think it's great. I mean, that image you just showed of all the networks of obedient people, obedient networks showing this thing on command. I think what we're seeing is the final swirling of credibility for the media and Democrats going down the drain. I think they're going to pay a price, and I think this